one question to answer.
You gave a promise.
You brought upon them only ruin and death.
You've won the mountain, is that not enough? We defend it.
This was the last move in a master plan.
These bats are bred for one purpose. for war. Bilbo is right. You cannot see what you have become. I did for them. You started.
The journey began with the simple quest of Broken Bar, but it ends with a battle that will shape the fate of Middle-earth. Dragons have fallen, armies are rising, and one Hobbit must face the choice that will change everything. This is the final chapter, Broken Bar. This is The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies, 2014, only on Cinema Reviews. The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies is a 2014 epic high fantasy adventure film directed by Peter Jackson from a screenplay by Fran Walsh, Bilbo Baggins, Jackson, and Guillermo del Toro. Based on J.R.R. Tolkien's 1937 novel The Hobbit, it is the sequel to 2013's The Hobbit, The Desolation of Smaug, and the final installment in the Hobbit trilogy, serving as a prequel to Jackson's The Lord of the Rings trilogy, 2001-2003. The story concludes the journey of the Hobbit Bilbo Baggins and Thronokenstald's company of dwarves, who secure the treasure within the Lonely Mountain as factions of dwarves, elves, and men vie for it, while the orc Asag the Defiler leads his forces against them. The film stars Martin Freeman, McKellen Richard Armitage, Evangeline Lilly, Luke Evans, Lee Pace, Benedict Cumberbatch, Kent Stott, Aidan Turner, Dean O'Gorman, Billy Connolly, Graham McTavish, James Nesbitt, Stephen Fry, and Ryan Gage, with Kate Blanchett, Ian Holm, Christopher Lee, Hugo Weaving, and Orlando Bloom. It marked Holm and Lee's final live-action roles and final film releases during their lifetimes, though both later provided voice work in other projects. The film premiered in London on December 1, 2014 and was released on 11th of December in New Zealand and 17th of December in the United States by Warner Bros. Pictures. It received mixed reviews from critics and grossed $962.2 million worldwide, ranking as the second highest-grossing film of 2014. It earned several accolades, including a nomination for Best Sound Editing at the 87th Academy Awards. Bilbo and the dwarves watch from the Lonely Mountain as Smaug sets Laketown ablaze. Bard escapes from prison and kills the dragon with the black arrow. Smaug's falling body crushes the master of Laketown and his followers as they flee with the town's gold. Bard becomes the leader of Laketown and leads its survivors to the ruins of Dale. Thrin, now in possession of the mountain's treasure, becomes obsessed with finding the Arkenstone, which Bilbo has secretly kept. Learning of the survivors' refuge in Dale, Thrin orders the mountain's entrance sealed. At Dol Guldur, Galadriel, Elrond, and Saruman rescue Gandalf and send him away with Radagast. They defeat the Nazgul and face a formless Sauron, who is banished to the east. Asag advances on Erebor with his orc army and sends his son Bolg to Mount Gundabad to gather reinforcements. Legolas and Tauriel witness Bolg's army, strengthened by orc berserkers and giant bats. Thranduil arrives in Dale with an elf army to claim treasure from Dwarf King Thra. Bard requests the gold Thran promised, but Thran refuses. Gandalf warns of Isag's army, yet Thranduil dismisses him. Bilbo secretly gives the Arkenstone to Thranduil and Bard to bargain for peace, but Thran rejects the offer. Bilbo confronts Thran over his greed, and Thran nearly kills him before Gandalf intervenes. Arrives with the dwarf army, but before battle can begin between the dwarves and elves, Isag's forces arrive, prompting the leaders to unite against the orcs while Bard withdraws to defend Dale. Thran overcomes his greed, regains his honor, and leads his company into battle. With Dwovin, Folly, and Collie, he rides to Ravenhill to kill Isag. Tauriel and Legolas warn of Bolg's approach, and Bilbo uses his magic ring to deliver the message unseen. Isag kills Folly, and Bolg kills Collie while overpowering Tauriel. Legolas kills Bolg after a fierce fight. The Great Eagles arrive with Radagast and Butern, turning the tide against the orcs. Thran kills Isag in a duel but is mortally wounded. He makes peace with Bilbo before dying, while Tauriel grieves over Collie and Thranduil advises Legolas to seek a northern ranger called Strider. And becomes king under the mountain. Bilbo bids farewell and returns home with Gandalf. At the Shire's border, Gandalf acknowledges Bilbo's ring and warns him, though Bilbo claims to have lost it. At Bag End, Bilbo interrupts the auctioning of his belongings and resumes his quiet life, secretly keeping the ring. 60 years later, he happily greets Gandalf on his 11th birthday. The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies, 2014, a comprehensive analysis of casting excellence. Introduction. Peter Jackson's The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies, released in 2014, stands as the epic conclusion to one of cinema's most ambitious trilogies. As the final installment in the prequel series to The Lord of the Rings, this film brought together an extraordinary ensemble cast that would define the legacy of Middle-earth on screen. The casting choices for this monumental production represent a masterclass in cinematic selection, blending established talent with fresh faces, and creating a tapestry of performances that would resonate with audiences worldwide. The magnitude of casting for the Battle of the Five Armies cannot be understated. With over 200 credited cast members and countless uncredited performers, the film represents one of the largest casting endeavors in modern cinema history. From the returning stars who had become synonymous with their Middle-earth characters to the newcomers who brought fresh energy to the saga's conclusion, every casting decision was crucial to the film's success. This comprehensive analysis explores the intricate web of casting choices that made The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies a cinematic achievement. We'll delve into the selection process, the performances that define the film, and the lasting impact of these casting decisions on the legacy of Middle-earth cinema. The returning heroes. Core cast continuity. Martin Freeman as Bilbo Baggins. At the heart of the Hobbit trilogy stands Martin Freeman's portrayal of Bilbo Baggins, a performance that anchored the entire prequel series. Freeman's casting was perhaps the most crucial decision for the trilogy, as he needed to embody the younger version of a character already immortalized by Ian Holm in The Lord of the Rings. Freeman's natural ability to convey both the comfortable Hobbit lifestyle and the reluctant hero's journey made him the perfect choice. Freeman brought a distinctly British sensibility to the role, combining his experience from The Office and Sherlock to create a Bilbo who was both relatable and extraordinary. His comedic timing, particularly in moments of bewilderment and reluctant bravery, provided the emotional core that audiences could connect with throughout the epic battles and fantastical elements of the story. In The Battle of the Five Armies, Freeman's Bilbo reaches the culmination of his character arc. The casting proved prescient as Freeman demonstrated his range, showing a Bilbo who had grown from the comfortable Hobbit of Bag End into someone capable of standing up to kings and dragons. His chemistry with the entire ensemble cast, particularly Richard Armitage's Thran, created some of the film's most memorable dramatic moments. Ian McKellen as Gandalf the Grey. Ian McKellen's return as Gandalf represented one of the most seamless casting transitions from The Lord of the Rings to the Hobbit trilogy. McKellen's deep understanding of the character, developed over years of portraying the wizard, brought gravitas and authenticity to every scene. His performance in the Battle of the Five Armies showcased the wisdom and power that would eventually define Gandalf in the later films. McKellen's commitment to the role went beyond mere performance. He became a mentor figure on set, helping to bridge the gaps between the original trilogy and the prequel films. His presence provided continuity and legitimacy to the entire production, reassuring fans that the magic of Middle-earth remained intact. The casting of McKellen also provided crucial narrative weight to the film's climactic moments. His scenes with other members of the White Council, including Cate Blanchett's Galadriel and Hugo Weaving's Elrond, created some of the film's most powerful sequences, demonstrating the depth of talent assembled for this production. Richard Armitage's casting as Throno proved to be one of the trilogy's most inspired choices. Known primarily for his television work in series like Spooks and North-South, Armitage brought a theatrical gravitas to the role that elevated every scene he appeared in. His Thron was regal yet flawed, noble yet consumed by the dragon sickness that would define his character arc. In the Battle of the Five Armies, Armitage delivered what many consider his career-defining performance. The character's descent into madness and eventual redemption required an actor capable of conveying complex emotional layers, and Armitage rose to the challenge magnificently. His chemistry with Martin Freeman created the emotional heart of the film, particularly in their final scenes together. Armitage's physical transformation for the role was equally impressive. His commanding presence and ability to convey leadership through subtle gestures and expressions made him believable as the king under the mountain. The casting department's choice to select an actor known for dramatic intensity rather than action films paid dividends in the film's more intimate character moments. The Dwarf Company ensemble excellence. The casting of the 13 dwarves represented one of the film's greatest achievements. Each actor brought distinct personality and physicality to their role, creating a believable company of warriors and adventurers. The ensemble work required careful consideration of how each performer would interact with their fellow company members. Ken Stott as Balin. Ken Stott's portrayal of Balin, the eldest and wisest of the company, provided emotional stability to the group dynamic. Stott, known for his work in Rebus and various British productions, brought a paternal quality to Balin that made him the natural counselor to Thron. His performance in the Battle of the Five Armies was particularly poignant, as he struggled to reach his king during the dragon sickness sequences. Graham McTavish as Dwellin. Graham McTavish's Dwellin represented the warrior spirit of the company. McTavish's imposing physical presence and gravelly voice made him the natural choice for Thron's most loyal companion. His background in action films and voice work prepared him well for the physical demands of the role, while his dramatic training allowed him to convey the deeper loyalties that defined Dwellin's character. The younger dwarves, Aidan Turner and Dean O'Gorman. The casting of Aidan Turner as Keely and Dean O'Gorman as Feely brought youth and energy to the company while also serving the film's romantic subplot. Turner's natural charisma and action experience made him ideal for the role of the archer dwarf, while O'Gorman's ability to convey both brotherhood and leadership potential made him perfect for the heir to the throne. Their performances in the Battle of the Five Armies were particularly impactful, as both characters faced their ultimate destinies. The casting department's decision to choose actors who could convey both the brotherhood between the characters and their individual heroism proved crucial to the film's emotional climax. The Elven Realm, ethereal casting. Orlando Bloom's return as Legolas. Orlando Bloom's return as Legolas represented a significant casting challenge, as the character did not appear in Tolkien's original Hobbit novel. However, his inclusion provided crucial continuity with the Lord of the Rings trilogy while also serving the film's need for spectacular action sequences. Bloom's physical preparation for returning to the role after more than a decade demonstrated his commitment to maintaining the character's essence. His martial arts training and stunt work created some of the film's most memorable action moments, while his dramatic scenes with Lee Pace's Thranduil provided depth to the Elven storyline. The decision to age Bloom's appearance subtly for the prequel setting showed careful attention to continuity, while his performance suggested the experiences that would shape the Legolas audiences knew from the later films. Evangeline Lilly as Tauriel. The creation and casting of Tauriel represented one of the trilogy's most controversial yet ultimately successful decisions. Evangeline Lilly, known primarily for her work on Lost, brought both physical capability and emotional depth to the role of the warrior elf. Lily's casting addressed the trilogy's need for strong female representation while also serving the romantic subplot with Aidan Turner's Keeley. Her background in action-adventure television prepared her well for the physical demands of the role, while her dramatic training allowed her to convey the conflict between duty and personal desire that defined Toriel's character. In the Battle of the Five Armies, Lily's performance was particularly crucial to the film's emotional impact. Her character's grief and loss provided some of the film's most powerful moments, while her action sequences demonstrated why she was chosen for this demanding role. Lee Pace as Thranduil. Lee Pace's casting as Thranduil, the Elven King, brought both regal bearing and subtle menace to the role. Pace's theatrical background and striking physical presence made him ideal for the aloof and powerful Elf Lord. His ability to convey both the character's ancient wisdom and his protective father's love for Legolas added layers to what could have been a one-dimensional antagonist. Pace's performance in the Battle of the Five Armies showcased his range, from the character's cold negotiations with the dwarves to his eventual recognition of their nobility. The casting department's choice to select an actor capable of both intimidating presence and emotional subtlety proved essential to the film's success. The White Council, legendary returns. Cate Blanchett as Galadriel. Cate Blanchett's return as Galadriel provided one of the film's most powerful performances. Her scenes in the Battle of the Five Armies, particularly during the confrontation with the necromancer, demonstrated why she was considered irreplaceable in the role. Blanchett's ability to convey both ethereal beauty and terrifying power made her perfect for these climactic moments. The casting of Blanchett also provided crucial star power to the production, lending prestige and legitimacy to the prequel trilogy. Her commitment to reprising the role demonstrated the respect the entire cast had for Jackson's vision and Tolkien's world. Hugo Weaving as Elrond. Hugo Weaving's return as Elrond maintained the continuity between the trilogies while also providing gravitas to the White Council scenes. Weaving's distinctive voice and commanding presence made him ideal for the role of the Wise Elf Lord, while his dramatic range allowed him to convey both the character's ancient wisdom and his concern for Middle-earth's future. Christopher Lee as Saruman. Christopher Lee's final performance as Saruman in the Battle of the Five Armies represented both a triumph and a farewell. The legendary actor's commitment to the role, even in his advanced years, demonstrated his dedication to Tolkien's work and Jackson's vision. His scenes with the White Council provided some of the film's most memorable moments, showcasing the power and presence that made him irreplaceable in the role. Lee's performance also served as a bridge between the trilogies, showing Saruman before his fall to darkness while hinting at the corruption that would later define him. The casting department's decision to include him in these crucial scenes proved essential to the film's success. The Lake Town Ensemble, expanding the world. Luke Evans as Bard the Bowman. Luke Evans's casting as Bard represented one of the trilogy's most successful expansions of the Tolkien source material. Evans, known for his work in musicals and action films, brought both heroic presence and everyman relatability to the role of the bargeman who would become king. Evans's performance in the Battle of the Five Armies was particularly crucial, as Bard served as both the dragon slayer and the leader of Dale's people during the climactic battle. His ability to convey both the reluctant hero's journey and the natural leader's instincts made him perfect for this expanded role. The casting department's choice to select an actor with both action experience and dramatic range proved essential, as Bard's character arc required both physical capability and emotional depth. Evans's chemistry with his on-screen children and his scenes with the other leaders during the battle negotiations demonstrated the wisdom of this casting choice. Stephen Fry as the Maester of Lake Town. Stephen Fry's casting as the Master of Lake Town brought both comedic relief and dramatic weight to the Lake Town sequences. Fry's distinctive presence and ability to convey both the character's corruption and his underlying cowardice made him perfect for this role. The decision to cast such a recognizable and beloved British actor in this role demonstrated the production's commitment to quality casting even in supporting roles. Fry's performance provided both entertainment value and narrative function, serving as a contrast to the more noble characters in the story. The Lake Town community. The extensive casting of Lake Town residents, including numerous New Zealand actors and extras, created a believable community that anchored the film's more fantastical elements. The careful selection of performers who could convey both the hardship of life in Lake Town and the hope for a better future provided crucial emotional grounding for the film's spectacular action sequences. The forces of darkness. Antagonist excellence. Benedict Cumberbatch as Smaug and the Necromancer. Benedict Cumberbatch's dual role as both Smaug the Dragon and the Necromancer represented one of the trilogy's most inspired casting choices. Cumberbatch's distinctive voice and dramatic range made him perfect for both the calculating malice of Smaug and the ancient evil of the Necromancer. While Smaug's role in the Battle of the Five Armies was limited to the opening sequence, Cumberbatch's performance provided the film with its most spectacular opening moments. His motion capture work and vocal performance created one of cinema's most memorable dragons, while his portrayal of the Necromancer added layers of menace to the White Council storyline. The casting department's decision to utilize Cumberbatch's rising star power and distinctive talents proved essential to the film's success, creating villains that were both terrifying and compelling. Manu Bennett as a Sag the Defiler. Manu Bennett's performance as a Sag provided the film with its primary physical antagonist. Bennett's background in action television and his imposing physical presence made him ideal for the motion capture work required to bring the pale orc to life. Bennett's performance in the Battle of the Five Armies was crucial to the film's action sequences, providing a worthy opponent for the heroes during the climactic battle. His ability to convey both the character's intelligence and his ruthless nature through motion capture work demonstrated the evolution of performance capture technology and the importance of casting actors who could work within these constraints. John II as Bolg. John II was casting as Bolg, Isag's son, provided another formidable orc antagonist for the film's battle sequences. His physical presence and action experience made him perfect for the demanding motion capture work, while his dramatic training allowed him to convey the character's savage intelligence. The decision to cast accomplished actors in these motion capture roles, rather than relying solely on stunt performers, demonstrated the production's commitment to creating believable and threatening antagonists. His performance in the film's climactic battles provided crucial dramatic weight to the action sequences. Supporting cast excellence. Building Middle-earth. Billy Connolly as Dane Ironfoot. Billy Connolly's casting as Dane Ironfoot brought both star power and distinctive personality to the dwarf lord who would lead the Iron Hills forces. Connolly's natural charisma and distinctive voice made him perfect for this crucial supporting role, providing both comic relief and martial authority. The decision to cast such a beloved comedian in this role demonstrated the production's understanding that even supporting characters needed to be memorable and distinctive. Connolly's performance, enhanced by impressive prosthetics and costume work, created one of the film's most entertaining characters. Mikael Persbrandt as Bjorn. Mikael Persbrandt's casting as Bjorn, the shape-shifting bear man, brought international talent to the production while also providing a memorable supporting character. Persbrandt's imposing physical presence and dramatic intensity made him perfect for this mysterious and powerful character. While Bjorn's role in the Battle of the Five Armies was relatively small, Persbrandt's performance provided crucial support to the film's climactic battle sequence. His casting also demonstrated the international scope of the production and the careful attention paid to even minor supporting roles. The casting process. Behind-the-scenes excellence. The casting of The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies was overseen by a team of experienced casting directors, including Liz Mullen and Miranda Rivers for New Zealand, John and Amy Hubbard for the UK, Victoria Burrows for the USA, and Scott Boland providing additional support. This international casting team ensured that the film could draw from the best talent available worldwide. The casting process for the film began years before production, with many roles requiring extensive preparation and physical transformation. The casting directors needed to consider not only acting ability but also physical capability, chemistry with other cast members, and the ability to work within the demanding technical requirements of a Peter Jackson production. The use of motion capture technology for many of the antagonist roles required casting actors who could convey performance through movement and voice alone. This specialized form of acting required careful consideration of each performer's abilities and experience with this demanding technique. Technical considerations and casting. The technical demands of The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies required casting decisions that went beyond traditional acting considerations. The extensive use of practical effects, motion capture, and complex action sequences meant that many cast members needed to possess specific physical capabilities and technical skills. The scale doubles and stunt performers who worked alongside the principal cast represented another layer of casting excellence. These performers needed to match not only the physical appearance of the main actors but also their movement patterns and mannerisms, ensuring seamless integration between practical and digital effects. The extensive makeup and prosthetics work required cast members who could perform effectively under heavy makeup applications that often took hours to apply. The endurance and professionalism required for these demanding working conditions influenced many casting decisions. International scope and local talent. The Battle of the Five Armies represented a truly international production, with cast members drawn from around the world. The film featured established stars from Hollywood, respected actors from British television and theatre, rising stars from various international markets, and talented local performers from New Zealand. This international approach to casting reflected both the global appeal of the Tolkien's work and Peter Jackson's commitment to finding the best possible actors for each role, regardless of their geographic origin. The result was a cast that brought diverse skills and perspectives to the production while maintaining the cohesive vision necessary for the film's success. The inclusion of numerous New Zealand actors, particularly in supporting and background roles, provided local authenticity to the production while also supporting the local film industry. Many of these performers brought years of experience from Jackson's previous films, creating a sense of continuity and familiarity that benefited the entire production. The uncredited performers, unsung heroes. While the credited cast of the Battle of the Five Armies is extensive, the film also featured numerous uncredited performers who contributed to its success. These include body doubles, additional voices, motion capture performers, and background artists who helped create the believable world of Middle-earth. The extensive list of uncredited performers demonstrates the scale of the production and the attention to detail required to create convincing battle sequences and crowd scenes. From the Lake Town refugees to the various warriors in the climactic battle, each performer contributed to the film's overall authenticity and impact. The inclusion of director Peter Jackson himself in an uncredited cameo as Bilbo's father in a picture demonstrates the collaborative and family-like atmosphere that characterized the production. This attention to detail in even the smallest roles reflects the care taken in every aspect of the film's casting. Legacy and impact of casting choices. The casting choices made for The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies have had lasting impact on both the careers of the actors involved and the legacy of Middle-earth cinema. Many of the performers became permanently associated with their characters, with their portrayals defining these roles for a generation of fans. The film's casting also influenced subsequent fantasy productions, demonstrating the importance of careful character selection and the value of international casting approaches. The success of relatively unknown actors like Richard Armitage and Aidan Turner in major roles showed that casting directors were willing to look beyond established stars to find the perfect fit for specific characters. The integration of practical performance with digital effects, particularly in the motion capture roles, set new standards for fantasy filmmaking and influenced casting considerations for similar productions. The success of performers like Benedict Cumberbatch and Manu Bennett in these technically demanding roles demonstrated the evolution of acting techniques in the digital age. Critical reception and performance analysis. The performances in The Battle of the Five Armies received generally positive critical reception, with particular praise for the emotional weight brought to the climactic battle sequences. Critics noted the strong chemistry between the principal cast members and the convincing portrayal of the relationships that had developed over the course of the trilogy. Martin Freeman's performance as Bilbo received widespread acclaim for its consistency and emotional depth throughout the trilogy's conclusion. Richard Armitage's portrayal of Thrawn's tragic arc was similarly praised, with many critics noting the Shakespearean quality of his performance in the film's dramatic climax. The supporting performances were also well received, with critics praising the distinctive personalities brought to even minor characters. The casting of comedic actors like Billy Connolly and Stephen Fry in supporting roles was noted as adding levity without undermining the film's dramatic weight. Conclusion: the triumph of ensemble casting The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies stands as a testament to the power of exceptional casting in creating memorable cinema. From the returning legends who reprised their iconic roles to the newcomers who brought fresh energy to Middle-earth, every casting decision contributed to the film's success. The film's casting achieved the difficult balance of honoring the legacy of The Lord of the Rings while also creating something new and distinctive. The careful selection of actors who could handle both the intimate character moments and the spectacular action sequences ensured that the film worked on multiple levels. The international scope of the casting, combined with the local authenticity provided by New Zealand performers, created a production that felt both epic in scale and intimate in character development. This approach to casting has influenced subsequent fantasy productions and continues to serve as a model for large-scale ensemble filmmaking. The technical innovations required by the production, from motion capture performance to extensive prosthetics work, pushed the boundaries of what was possible in casting for fantasy films. The success of these technical elements, combined with strong traditional performances, demonstrated the evolution of casting considerations in the digital age. Perhaps most importantly, the casting of The Battle of the Five Armies succeeded in its primary goal, bringing J.R.R. Tolkien's beloved characters to life in a way that honored both the source material and the cinematic legacy of Middle-earth. The performances created in this film will continue to define these characters for generations of fans, ensuring that the casting choices made for this production will be remembered as a significant achievement in cinema history. The legacy of the casting for The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies extends beyond the film itself, influencing careers, setting new standards for fantasy filmmaking, and demonstrating the crucial role that casting plays in the success of large-scale productions. As the final chapter in Peter Jackson's Middle-earth saga, the film's casting represents both a culmination of years of careful character development and a fitting conclusion to one of cinema's most ambitious casting endeavors. In the annals of film history, The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies will be remembered not only for its spectacular battles and stunning visuals but also for the exceptional ensemble of performers who brought this epic story to its conclusion. The casting choices made for this film demonstrate the art and science of character selection, showing how the right actor in the right role can elevate material from good to extraordinary and create performances that resonate with audiences long after the final credits roll. The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies, 2014, the epic conclusion to Jackson's Middle-earth saga introduction. The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies stands as the climactic finale to Peter Jackson's ambitious trilogy adaptation of J.R.R. Tolkien's beloved children's novel. Released in 2014, this epic fantasy adventure film marked not only the end of the Hobbit film series but also the conclusion of Jackson's 13-year journey through Middle-earth, following his monumentally successful Lord of the Rings trilogy. As the sixth and final film in Jackson's Middle-earth saga, The Battle of the Five Armies carried enormous expectations and the weight of bringing closure to one of cinema's most beloved fantasy franchises. The film represents a fascinating study in modern blockbuster filmmaking, showcasing both the spectacular possibilities and inherent challenges of adapting beloved literary works for contemporary audiences. With its runtime of 144 minutes, it served as the most action-packed and dwarf-focused entry in the Hobbit trilogy, living up to its title by delivering massive battle sequences that push the boundaries of digital filmmaking technology. Production development and pre-production. The journey to the Battle of the Five Armies began with a significant evolution in the scope of Jackson's Hobbit adaptation. Originally conceived as a two-part film series, the project underwent a crucial transformation when Jackson announced on July 30, 2012, that The Hobbit would be expanded into a trilogy. This decision fundamentally altered the trajectory of the final film and created the space necessary for the expansive battle sequences that would define the Battle of the Five Armies. Jackson's rationale for the trilogy format was rooted in his desire to create a comprehensive exploration of Middle-earth that would seamlessly bridge the gap between The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. He explained that the third film would focus primarily on the Battle of the Five Armies itself while making extensive use of Tolkien's appendices from The Return of the King, which provided rich background material about Middle-earth's history and characters not fully explored in the original Hobbit novel. The development process was particularly complex because Jackson had to balance multiple creative demands. First, he needed to remain faithful to the spirit and key events of Tolkien's source material. Second, he had to create the satisfying conclusion to the character arcs established in the first two Hobbit films. Third, he needed to ensure that the film would serve as an effective prequel to his Lord of the Rings trilogy, maintaining continuity in tone, visual style, and narrative elements. The decision to expand to 3 films also meant that Jackson and his co-writers, A. Fran Walsh, Bilbo Baggins, and Guillermo del Toro had the creative freedom to develop original character arcs and relationships that weren't present in Tolkien's relatively brief original text. This included the expansion of characters like Tauriel, the exploration of the relationships between Collie and the Elf Maiden, and the development of political tensions between the various factions that would clash in the climactic battle. One of the most significant pre-production decisions was the choice of title. Initially announced as There and Back Again in August 2012, the film underwent a title change in April 2014 when Jackson decided that the Battle of the Five Armies better captured the essence and focus of the final installment. Jackson explained that while There and Back Again might have been appropriate for a 2-part adaptation covering Bilbo's complete journey, the 3-part structure meant that Bilbo's arrival at Erebor had already occurred in the second film, making the original title feel displaced. The pre-production phase also involved extensive planning for the massive battle sequences that would dominate the film's second and third acts. Jackson and his team had to design and choreograph conflicts involving multiple armies, dwarves, elves, men, orcs, and various creatures, each with their own fighting styles, weapons, and tactical approaches. This required months of storyboarding, previs work, and coordination between the various departments responsible for costume design, weapon creation, creature design, and digital effects. The filming process for the Battle of the Five Armies was intricately woven into the production schedule of the entire Hobbit trilogy, with Jackson employing a comprehensive approach that allowed him to capture footage for all 3 films simultaneously. This method, while efficient from a logistical standpoint, also meant that the cast and crew were working on multiple storylines and character arcs concurrently, requiring exceptional organization and forward planning. Principal photography for the Hobbit trilogy took place primarily in New Zealand, utilizing both the stunning natural landscapes that had become synonymous with Jackson's Middle-earth films and the extensive studio facilities at Stone Street Studios and other Wellington locations. For the Battle of the Five Armies, much of the filming focused on the elaborate battle sequences, which required a combination of practical effects, motion capture technology, and extensive digital environments. The battle scenes were particularly complex to film, requiring the coordination of hundreds of extras, elaborate practical sets, and sophisticated camera work that would later be enhanced with digital effects. Jackson utilized multiple camera systems, including traditional film cameras, high-speed cameras for slow-motion sequences, and specialized rigs for complex movement shots. The use of Peter Jackson's preferred 48 frames per second technology also added technical complexity to the filming process, as every shot had to be captured with this higher frame rate in mind. One of the most challenging aspects of filming was managing the extensive cast, which included returning actors from both The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings films. Coordinating schedules for actors like Ian Coven, Orlando Bloom, Kate Blanchett, and Christopher Lee while also managing the large ensemble of dwarf actors and newcomers to the series required meticulous planning and flexibility. The emotional scenes, particularly those involving character deaths and farewells, were filmed with special attention to actor preparation and performance. Richard Armitage's portrayal of Thrawn's descent into madness and eventual redemption required multiple takes and careful character work to ensure that the transformation felt authentic and emotionally resonant. Jackson also incorporated various cameo appearances and family connections into the filming process. His own daughters, along with those of other key crew members, appeared as refugees during Smaug's attack on Lake Town, while various department heads and longtime collaborators received small roles throughout the film. The practical elements of filming included extensive work with miniatures and forced perspective techniques, hallmarks of Jackson's filmmaking approach that had been refined through his work on The Lord of the Rings. The creation of Ereber's interior, the ruins of Dale, and the various battle locations required careful construction and detailed set design to support both practical and digital effects work. Post-production. The post-production phase of the Battle of the Five Armies was among the most complex and technologically demanding aspects of the entire production. Given the film's heavy reliance on digital effects, creatures, and massive battle sequences, the post-production team faced the challenge of seamlessly integrating practical footage with extensive computer-generated imagery to create the epic scope that the story demanded. Weta Digital, Jackson's longtime effects partner, took the lead on the digital effects work, which included the creation of massive armies, digital creatures, fantastical environments, and complex destruction sequences. The team had to render thousands of individual digital characters for the battle scenes, each with their own armor, weapons, and fighting animations. The sheer scale of the digital armies required innovative approaches to crowd simulation and rendering techniques that pushed the boundaries of what was technically achievable at the time. One of the most significant post-production challenges was the integration of motion capture performances with digital characters. Benedict Cumberbatch's portrayal of Smaug required extensive work to translate his motion capture performance into the massive dragon that opens the film. Similarly, the various orc and goblin characters, including Asog and Bolg, required careful attention to ensure that the actors' performances were preserved while creating believable and terrifying digital creatures. The film's color grading and visual tone were carefully crafted to maintain continuity with the previous Hobbit films while also creating a darker, more serious atmosphere appropriate for the story's climactic battles and tragic elements. The post-production team worked to balance the fantastical elements of Middle-earth with a sense of realism and weight that would make the emotional stakes feel genuine and impactful. Sound design played a crucial role in the post-production process, with the team creating distinctive audio signatures for each of the armies, weapons, and creatures featured in the battles. The sound of clashing armies, roaring dragons, and various Middle-earth creatures required innovative recording techniques and digital audio processing to create an immersive and believable sonic landscape. The editing process was particularly complex due to the need to balance multiple storylines, character arcs, and the extensive battle sequences. Jackson and his editing team had to ensure that the pacing remained engaging throughout the film's 144-minute runtime while giving adequate screen time to the various character resolutions and emotional beats that fans expected from the trilogy's conclusion. Music. Howard Shore returned as composer for the Battle of the Five Armies, bringing his acclaimed musical voice back to Middle-earth for the final time in Jackson's saga. Shore's approach to the score represented both a culmination of themes he had developed throughout the Hobbit trilogy and a bridge to the musical motifs that would later define The Lord of the Rings. His work on this final film required careful attention to thematic resolution while also creating new musical material appropriate for the epic battle sequences and emotional character moments. The score featured several new themes specifically created for the Battle of the Five Armies, including motifs for Dane Ironfoot's army, the orc stronghold of Mount Gundabad, and the dwarves' war preparations. Shore's composition for the Gundabad theme was particularly notable for its incorporation of didgeridoos, creating a chorus effect that gave the orc forces a distinctive and menacing musical identity. This innovative use of unconventional instruments demonstrated Shore's continued willingness to experiment with orchestral textures and world music influences. Shore's primary focus for this score was the interaction and resolution of the various themes he had established throughout both trilogies. The music needed to bring together the heroic themes associated with different races and characters while also building toward the tragic and triumphant moments that define the film's climax. The composer worked extensively on blending and sometimes clashing these musical themes against one another, creating a complex musical narrative that paralleled the political and emotional conflicts on screen. The orchestration was handled by Conrad Pope, who conducted the orchestra, and James Sizemore, both of whom had worked closely with Shore throughout the Middle-earth films. The music was performed by the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra, maintaining the high orchestral standards established in previous films. Additionally, Shore incorporated two gamelan orchestras, adding exotic and otherworldly textures that enhance the fantastical elements of Middle-earth while providing unique sonic colors for specific scenes and characters. The vocal elements of the score were provided by the London Voices and the Tiffin Boys Choir, recorded at Ayr Lyndhurst in London. These vocal contributions added both ethereal beauty and dramatic weight to key moments in the film, particularly during the more mystical sequences involving Galadriel, Elrond, and Saruman's confrontation with the Nazgûl Elend Sauron. One of the most significant musical additions to the film was Billy Boyd's song The Last Goodbye, which played over the end credits. Boyd, who had portrayed Peregrine Took in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, both wrote and performed this song, creating a poignant farewell to Jackson's Middle-earth saga. The song served as both a metatextual goodbye to the film series and an in-universe reflection on the themes of friendship, loss, and the passage of time that ran throughout Tolkien's work. Shore's score for the Battle of the Five Armies represented the culmination of his work across 6 Middle-earth films, creating a musical legacy that would stand as one of the most comprehensive and beloved fantasy film scores in cinema history. His ability to create distinctive musical identities for different cultures, characters, and locations while maintaining an overall cohesive sound across multiple films demonstrated his mastery of large-scale film scoring. Released theatrical. The theatrical release of the Battle of the Five Armies was a carefully orchestrated global event that reflected both the massive commercial expectations for the film and the cultural significance of concluding Jackson's Middle-earth saga. The release strategy involved multiple premiere events, extensive marketing campaigns, and a coordinated international rollout designed to maximize both critical reception and box office performance. The film's world premiere took place in London at Leicester Square on December 1, 2014, marking the beginning of what would be the final promotional tour for Jackson's Middle-earth films. This premiere event was attended by the principal cast, Jackson, and other key creative contributors, creating a celebration that acknowledged both the completion of the Hobbit trilogy and the end of an era in fantasy filmmaking. The international release schedule was strategically planned to build momentum across different markets. The film opened in New Zealand on December 11, 2014, honoring the country that had served as both the filming location and spiritual home of Jackson's Middle-earth. The United Kingdom followed on December 12, with the crucial United States market receiving the film on December 17. This staggered release allowed for word-of-mouth and critical reception to build momentum across key markets. Warner Bros. Initially scheduled the film for a July 18, 2014 release but later moved it to December 17, 2014. Positioning it as a major holiday blockbuster. This scheduling decision reflected the studio's confidence in the film's commercial prospects and allowed it to compete in the lucrative Christmas movie market. The film was released in multiple formats, including standard 2D presentations, 3D, IMAX, and Jackson's preferred 48 frames per second format. The variety of presentation options allowed theaters to maximize their revenue potential while giving audiences choices in their viewing experience. The IMAX version was particularly successful, with the film setting December IMAX opening records in multiple markets. One of the most significant aspects of the theatrical release was the film's presentation as the conclusion to a cultural phenomenon. Marketing materials and promotional events emphasized the end of an era aspect of the release, appealing both to longtime fans of Jackson's work and to general audiences who had followed the Middle-earth films over more than a decade. The film was released with extensive promotional partnerships and tie-in products, including video games, collectibles, and various consumer products. These partnerships helped extend the film's cultural reach beyond traditional movie marketing and created additional revenue streams that supported the overall success of the release. International markets played a crucial role in this film's release strategy. The film opened in China on January 23, 2015. Where it achieved significant commercial success and set opening records for Warner Bros. The Chinese market, along with other international territories, ultimately provided the majority of the film's global box office revenue. The theatrical release also included special events and promotional activities designed to celebrate the conclusion of Jackson's Middle-earth saga. These ranged from special premiere screenings to promotional partnerships with football clubs in New Zealand, demonstrating the cultural impact and local pride associated with the film's New Zealand production. Home media. The home media release of the Battle of the Five Armies represented a comprehensive effort to provide fans with extensive additional content and viewing options beyond the theatrical experience. Warner Bros. Developed a multi-format, multi-phase release strategy that included both the theatrical version and an extended edition, each targeting different audience segments and providing various levels of additional content. The initial digital release occurred on March 6, 2015, allowing early adopters and digital consumers immediate access to the film following its theatrical run. This was followed by the physical DVD and Blu-ray release on March 24, 2015. In the United States, the physical media release included standard DVD, Blu-ray, and Blu-ray 3D formats, providing options for consumers with different home theater setups and preferences. The home video release was notably successful, with the film topping home video sales charts in its opening weekend, generating $70.3 million in revenue with 3.4 million copies sold, making it the 9th best-selling home video title of 2015. This commercial success demonstrated the continued strength of the Middle-earth brand in home entertainment markets and the loyalty of the fan base. The extended edition release represented a significant event for fans and collectors of Jackson's Middle-earth films. Released on digital platforms on October 20, 2015, and on physical media on November 17, 2015. The extended edition added 20 minutes of additional footage and original music to the film. This additional content included expanded character moments, extended battle sequences, and additional scenes that provided greater depth to the story and characters. One of the most notable aspects of the extended edition was its R rating from the MPAA for some violence, making it the only Middle-earth film to receive a restricted rating. The Australian Classification Board gave it an MA 15+ rating for strong fantasy violence, and the BBFC granted it a 15 certificate for strong violence. This rating reflected the more intense and graphic nature of some of the additional battle content and demonstrated Jackson's willingness to include more mature content for adult fans of the series. The extended edition release was accompanied by extensive special features, including behind-the-scenes documentaries, cast and crew commentaries, deleted scenes, and production galleries. These bonus materials provided fans with comprehensive insight into the filmmaking process and served as a farewell documentation of Jackson's work in Middle-earth. A significant milestone in the home media history of the film occurred with the Ultra HD Blu-ray release on November 30, 2020, in the United Kingdom and December 1, 2020, in the United States. This release included both theatrical and extended editions of all three Hobbit films in 4K resolution with HDR enhancement, representing the highest quality home viewing experience available for Jackson's Middle-earth saga. The comprehensive nature of the home media releases reflected both Warner Bros.' recognition of the passionate fan base for these films and the industry trend toward providing extensive additional content to justify home media purchases in an increasingly digital entertainment landscape. Reception. Box office. The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies achieved substantial commercial success at the global box office, grossing $962.2 million worldwide and securing its position as the second highest-grossing film of 2014, behind only Transformers: Age of Extinction. The film's financial performance, while strong, also reflected some of the challenges facing the conclusion of a long-running franchise and the changing dynamics of international film markets during 2014. The film's domestic performance in the United States and Canada totaled $255.1 million, making it the lowest grossing of the 3 Hobbit films in North America and the lowest grossing of all 6 Middle-earth adaptations in that market. However, it still ranked as the 6th highest grossing film of 2014 in the domestic market, demonstrating its continued appeal to American audiences despite franchise fatigue and increased competition. The opening weekend performance provided insight into audience enthusiasm for the final Hobbit film. The film earned $11.2 million from Tuesday late-night shows, marking the second highest preview performance of 2014 and breaking the record for Middle-earth adaptation previews previously set by The Desolation of Smaug. The film then earned $24.5 million on its opening day, including previews, and ultimately achieved a 5-day opening total of $89.1 million, which was the second biggest 5-day opening in the Hobbit franchise. Despite these strong opening numbers, industry analysts noted that the film underperformed initial expectations on a 3-day basis and fell short of its predecessor's opening weekend totals. This performance reflected several factors, including audience fatigue with the extended trilogy format, increased competition from other holiday releases, and the challenge of maintaining momentum for a franchise conclusion. International markets provided the majority of the film's revenue, with $707.1 million in foreign box office receipts. The film achieved numerous opening records in international markets, including all-time Warner Bros. Opening records in Russia, $13.8 million, Argentina, $2.1 million, Sweden, and Finland. It also set 2014 opening records in Germany, $20.5 million, France, $15.1 million, and Spain, $6.3 million. The Chinese market proved particularly important for the film's international success, with the film earning an all-time opening record for Warner Bros. In China with $49.8 million in its opening weekend, ultimately totaling $121.7 million in that market. Other significant international markets included the UK, Ireland, Malta, $61.3 million, and Australia, $27 million. The film maintained the #1 position at the North American box office for 3 consecutive weekends, demonstrating strong audience retention despite facing competition from numerous new releases each weekend. Internationally, it held the top position for 4 consecutive weekends and 5 weekends total, showing sustained global appeal. Industry publications noted that while the film failed to reach the $1 billion milestone that some had predicted, various factors including plunging exchange rates around the globe and currency fluctuations meant that Warner Bros. And MGM ultimately received nearly $90 million less than expected due to the rising dollar and declining foreign currencies. Despite these challenges, Forbes declared the trilogy an unmitigated financial grand slam for all parties. The film's financial success was further enhanced by ancillary revenue streams, including home video sales, digital rentals, merchandise, and licensing deals. Deadline Hollywood calculated the film's net profit at $103.4 million when accounting for production budgets, marketing, talent participations, and other costs, placing it 14th on their list of 2014's most valuable blockbusters. Critical response. The critical reception of The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies reflected the complex relationships between audiences, critics, and blockbuster franchise filmmaking in the modern cinema landscape. The film received mixed reviews from critics, though the response was generally more positive than some of the harshest criticism leveled at previous entries in the Hobbit trilogy. On review aggregator Rotten Tomatoes, the film achieved a 59% approval rating based on 265 reviews, with an average rating of 6.30. The site's critical consensus read, though somewhat overwhelmed by its own spectacle, The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies ends Peter Jackson's second Middle-earth trilogy on a reasonably satisfying note. This rating placed it in the middle range of critical reception for blockbuster films and represented a slight improvement over some earlier entries in the trilogy. Metacritic, which provides a weighted average of critic scores, gave the film a score of 59 out of 100 based on 46 critics, indicating mixed or average reviews. This score reflected the divided critical opinion about the film's merits and shortcomings, with critics acknowledging both its technical achievements and its narrative challenges. Audience reception, as measured by CinemaScore polling during opening weekend, was more positive, with moviegoers giving the film an average grade of an A+ to F scale. This score matched that of its predecessor, The Desolation of Smaug, and suggested that general audiences were more satisfied with the film than professional critics. Positive reviews often praised the film's energy, shorter running time compared to previous entries, and sense of closure for the trilogy. Scott Foundas of Variety wrote that the result is at once the trilogy's most engrossing episode, its most expeditious, at a comparatively lean 144 minutes, and also its darkest both visually and in terms of the forces that stir in the hearts of men, dwarves and dorks alike. Todd McCarthy of The Hollywood Reporter offered praise for Jackson's overall achievement, noting that after 6 films, 13 years and 1,031 minutes of accumulated running time, Peter Jackson has concluded his massively remunerative genuflection at the altar of J.R.R. Tolkien with a film that may be the most purely entertaining of any in the collection. Andrew Pulver of The Guardian provided a balanced assessment, writing that this film is a fitting cap to an extended series that, if nothing else, has transformed Tolkien's place in the wider culture. This observation reflected the broader cultural impact of Jackson's films beyond their immediate critical reception. However, negative reviews focused on several recurring criticisms of Jackson's Hobbit trilogy. Critics often cited issues with pacing, over-reliance on digital effects, and the challenges inherent in expanding a relatively simple children's story into an epic trilogy. Inku Kang of The Wrap criticized the film's length and Jackson's directorial choices, writing that the 144-minute running time showcases Jackson's worst tendencies: Ian's long battle scenes, sloppy and abrupt resolutions, portentous romances, off-rhythm comic timing, and, newly in this case, patience-testing fanservice. Tim Roby of the Daily Telegraph was particularly critical, describing the film as a paragraph on steroids that was neither very terrible nor remotely unexpected. It's a series of stomping footnotes in search of a climax. This review reflected the criticism that the film prioritized spectacle over narrative coherence. The BBC's Nicholas Barber offered a more nuanced critique, acknowledging that Jackson had succeeded in bridging the gaps between The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings and praising the film as a colossal technical achievement, while also criticizing it for lacking compelling storytelling due to its repetitive battle scenes and a lack of plot. Many critics acknowledged the technical mastery evident in the film's production values, visual effects, and musical score, even when they were less enthusiastic about the storytelling. The film's achievement in creating believable fantasy worlds and creatures was widely recognized, as was Howard Shore's musical contribution to the series. The critical response also reflected broader discussions about franchise filmmaking, adaptation challenges, and the balance between commercial success and artistic achievement. Many reviews grappled with the question of whether Jackson's expansion of The Hobbit into a trilogy was justified by the results, with critics divided on this fundamental creative decision. Despite mixed critical reception, the film was recognized with several award nominations, including an Academy Award nomination for Best Sound Editing at the 87th Academy Awards. It also received recognition from various critics' organizations, including the Broadcast Film Critics Association, Heartland Film Festival, Phoenix Film Critics Society, and Hollywood Makeup Artist and Hairstylist Guild. The critical response to the Battle of the Five Armies ultimately reflected the complex legacy of Jackson's return to Middle-earth, acknowledging both the remarkable technical achievements and the narrative challenges inherent in adapting beloved literary works for modern blockbuster cinema. While critics were divided on the film's overall success, there was general recognition of its role in completing one of cinema's most ambitious fantasy film projects. Conclusion: The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies stands as a complex and ambitious conclusion to Peter Jackson's six-film journey through Middle-earth. As both the finale of the Hobbit trilogy and the culmination of over a decade of Middle-earth filmmaking, the film faced the extraordinary challenge of satisfying multiple audiences while bringing closure to one of cinema's most beloved fantasy sagas. The film's production represents a remarkable achievement in modern blockbuster filmmaking, showcasing cutting-edge technology, elaborate practical effects, and sophisticated storytelling techniques. From its complex development process through its extensive post-production work, the film demonstrated the possibilities and challenges of contemporary epic filmmaking. While critical reception was mixed, the film's substantial commercial success and positive audience response indicated that Jackson and his team had succeeded in creating a satisfying conclusion for the trilogy's intended audience. The film's box office performance of $962.2 million worldwide confirmed the continued commercial viability of the Middle-earth franchise and demonstrated the global appeal of Jackson's vision of Tolkien's world. The film's legacy extends beyond its immediate reception, serving as a capstone to one of the most technically innovative and culturally significant film series in modern cinema history. Through its comprehensive home media releases and continued availability across multiple formats, The Battle of the Five Armies continues to find new audiences and maintain its place in the broader Middle-earth film canon. Ultimately, The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies succeeded in its primary mission, providing a fitting conclusion to Jackson's Middle-earth saga while honoring both Tolkien's literary legacy and the expectations of fans who had followed this cinematic journey for more than a decade. Whether viewed as the culmination of a trilogy or as the final chapter in a larger saga, the film stands as a testament to the enduring power of fantasy storytelling and the remarkable achievements possible in modern cinema. Review. 1 Farewell, Master Burglar. Go back to your books and your armchair. Broken bar. Plant your trees, watch them grow. If more people valued home above gold, this world would be a merrier place. A broken bar. The enduring popularity and usefulness of those gargantuan extended editions of director Peter Jackson's celebrated Lord of the Rings adaptations, which graphed between 30 and 50 minutes of exposition, exploration, and effects onto epic films that already pushed and punished the 3-hour mark theatrically, isn't difficult to surmise. Plot is an existential, near-apocalyptic struggle, and J.R.R. Tolkien's Middle-earth is a dense, fairly miraculous setting for a film, full to bursting with hidden treasures and wonders to behold, populated by many distinct races, each with its own obscure motives and ancient grudges to nurse, facing half a dozen or more delicious varieties of increasingly hearty evil, from giant spiders and undead bounty hunters, to treacherous sorcerers and impossibly vast armies of genetically enhanced butchers, to the wellspring embodiment of darkness itself, to the heartrending corruption of the mortal soul. As subject matter, the 3 volumes of Lauder fairly cry out for added consideration, and if there are moments where Jackson, a superfan charged with delivering a version of Tolkien appropriate cinematically to its outsized literary influence and renown, oversteps his bounds, to me, the Oscar-winning Return of the King still charitably suffers from bloat and at least too many endings. His instincts are much more often correct, and his overall achievement magnificent. Middle-earth brought from the page to thrilling, vibrant, lived-in existence, a challenging physical and emotional journey, tangible in both its weariness and wonder, the thrum and danger of encroaching, all-encompassing darkness, all out, simply fantastical war on a scale never before seen. If Jackson has proved he knows one thing, it's scale. Then there's The Hobbit, Tolkien's comparatively modest and straightforward, yet no less beloved, single-volume literature prequel, and an invitation to speculate for a moment. Remember that, around the turn of the millennium, as Jackson engaged in increasingly tense pre-production wrangling with prospective financiers and distributors over the scope and direction of his later adaptation. The film was proposed variously as a standalone title, and, for some time, as a pair of films, close, one assumes, in purview to the charming cel animated oddities Ralph Bakshi produced in the 1970s. Only late in the process did it become clear that Lauter could generate equivalent movies for each of Tolkien's original 3 books. Later, fans clamored for Jackson, coasting on the trilogy's global success, to tackle The Hobbit next, but legal complications with the property's owners and the Tolkien estate hamstrung any serious efforts. By the late aughts, however, Jackson had been reaffirmed by proclamation as, for all intents and purposes, the George Lucas of Middle-earth, and pre-production on The Hobbit began, with his Lauter Brain Trust joined by director and singular fantasist Guillermo del Toro, Pan's Labyrinth, Hellboy, and the 300-page source material somehow cast as a 6-hour, 2-part series, the first film recounting much of the original quest, with the second as a sort of bridge to the later trilogy assembled out of bits of stray story and filled out by the various Middle-earth building appendices Tolkien apparently could never stop including in his books. As 2012 dawned, fans already excited for the Christmas release of The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey, received some startling, potentially double-edged news. Director Del Toro had departed Middle-earth altogether to shepherd his own implacable army of projects already in development, and what had once been the dubious 2-part adaptation of a slender fantasy novel was now, almost inexplicably, a trilogy, just like its cinematic predecessor. At this point, before a frame had even been viewed publicly, The Hobbit already smacked to some, like yours truly, as, potentially, Jackson's very own Star Wars prequel trilogy, a high-profile, deep-impact vanity project and convergence of diminishing artistic returns with escalating financial returns, both of those results practically predestined. With the release of the second trilogy's concluding chapter, and, one imagines, Jackson's final word on Middle-earth, the Battle of the Five Armies, those twin prophecies have more or less come to pass. Even with the benefit of hindsight, which probably wasn't as necessary in evaluating The Hobbit as it was the Star Wars prequels, it's worth posing a question that speaks to the worth of the overall enterprise. If Peter Jackson's big break back in 2001 had been a big-budget, blockbuster adaptation of The Hobbit, what might have happened, and how might that film have been mounted? Would it have had similar impact? Would it still have unquestionably made Jackson's career? Is there any conceivable way it becomes a single, 3-hour film, let alone a lumbering trilogy of them? I pose these easily answerable questions not because I wish to pile onto The Hobbit, which, despite its crippling largesse, contains a fairly ripping spirit of adventure, along with certain sequences and individual shots that, by virtue of time and technical expertise, far exceed even the best the Lauter trilogy had to offer. That just makes its failure as an enterprise the more disappointing. As its director and visionary curator, Jackson probably arrived with the least number of dollar signs in his eyes, and clearly approached the second trilogy with a self-imposed mandate to expand The Hobbit's source material's scope into something with a more pronounced, sweeping, and relatable epic thrust, whether or not the material itself was worthy of such excess. Jackson had, as his model, the most critically and financially successful film franchise of the new millennium, one, at least to a degree, of his own devising. It is understandable why he thought he might well pull 3 films off, even as the decision looks hubristic in retrospect. The Battle of the Five Armies, in Tolkien's world, comprises not 1/3 of The Hobbit's length but roughly 1/5. As such, its cinematic namesake has the thinnest pretense for existence of any of the films so far, yet, it should be said, struggles heroically to outdo and exceed its inherent limitations. The story directly picks up the cliffhanger from 2013's The Desolation of Smaug, which saw the fearsome, titular, Benedict Cumberbatch-voiced dragon storm out of his lair in the vast, gold-choked halls of Erebor to inflict fiery wrath on the human denizens of nearby Lake Town. Assuming his traditional posture, Hobbit burglar Bilbo Baggins helplessly watches the carnage from afar with his dwarven fellowship, as Smaug cruelly dive-bombs mile-long stretches of buildings, which explode into flame as Lake Town's citizenry takes to its network of canals in a desperate escape attempt. After the fiend is eventually killed, Lake Town's refugees trek toward the Lonely Mountain, displaced from their burnt-out husk of a home, while the Dwarven Company already there resettles Erebor, plundering its riches in search of the Arkenstone, a powerful, corrupting sort of discount One Ring, Middle-earth MacGuffin that leader Thronocanshield fiercely covets as his birthright, and fortifying against imminent attack from one or more disgruntled parties. The five armies in play here are elves, high-horsed, or, in this case, moosed, as ever, but strictly looking for treasure, Lake Town's human rabble, nobly/pitifully seeking payment for services rendered during the dwarves' journey, an amusingly coarse, possibly drunk, dwarven host arrived to defend its newly reclaimed homeland, and not one but two armies of orcs, a swarming harbinger of the far direr things to come in Lothra. At 144 minutes, battle boasts the most streamlined running time of the trilogy so far, indicative of the machinations undertaken in attempting to escalate its merely climactic conflict into a titanic one. Both orc leaders see extensive screen time in the trilogy, variously dwarf hunting and gearing up for war. One sports a chewed-up, desiccated face that kinda resembles the Crypt Keeper from HBO's A90s Tales from the Crypt revamp. The Orc King, who bears the Thronocanshield character a particular grudge, looks, with his scarred, pasty face and rat-like ears, eerily like legendary oddbald genre villain Michael Berryman, of Weird Science and The Hills Have Eyes, Wes Craven version, fame. My elemental problem with The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies is my overarching problem with the entire Hobbit conceit. In Jackson's hands, it is a simple, involving story blown out of any and all proportion, both physically and emotionally. Having already successfully visited the well once, Jackson's Hobbit approximates impossible Lothra-level scale on events that warrant far less and seeks consistent Lothra-level impact in both stakes and relationships, importing numerous big wheels from Lothra Legolas, Saruman, Galadriel, etc. that feel, at best, out of place, and even inventing one illegalized melodramatic gal pal played by Lust's Evangeline Lily A for the purpose of creating a silly, unconvincing whole-cloth elf-dwarf romance that cannot hope to support it. If Lothra on screen was a thrilling and epic existential struggle against, to paraphrase a different British literary luminary, the dying of the light, The Hobbit, at its most padded, self-indulgent moments, of which there are many, is a fight for survival of quite a different type. The Battle of the Five Armies has exactly two extended set pieces to recommend it. Smaug's raising of Lake Town is appropriately harrowing, interspersed with the efforts of Kate from Lost to escape via the canal system and Bard the Dragon Slayer to earn his title, besieged atop a rickety tower, bow in hand. The Five Armies clash itself is sort of a rote, predictable affair, full of war cries, clanging metal and anonymous CG participants, with chaos recycled, if not seemingly lifted wholesale, from several of its five predecessors, all of which did the carnage appreciably better. However, about 20 minutes into the larger battle, our principals peel off on a daring mission to assault Michael Berryman and his orcs atop a precarious, vertiginous, mountaintop perch. It is here that the film's heart finally starts beating in earnest, and the assault on Berryman becomes, like Bilbo's desolation encounter with Smaug despite attempting to turn the party's subterranean flight from the Goblin King into a bravura Temple of Doom-level mine escape. Unexpected Journey has no comparable sequence A battle's de facto centerpiece. Jackson, who has, to this point, invested minutes by the interminable handful in exploring the politics and sociology of his human and elf factions, and by the bushel in his efforts to turn Thronocanshield as a 1.5-note, miserly dwarf king of the Lonely Mountain into first a tragic figure and then a tragic hero, instantly reminds his restless captive audience of his prodigious gifts as a CGI-bedded, grain-action storyteller. CG Legalize may look as goofy as ever he did, this time zipping across a huge stone bridge as it crumbles in midair, But in the moments where Jackson stops trying so damned hard and starts just letting things flow, as in the outnumbered dwarves' desperate last stand, or a patently unsettling moment where Oakenshield, having finally vanquished the Berryman orc by drowning him in a frozen lake, watches the body of his fallen opponent drift ominously beneath the ice, its fierce eyes slowly closing, the film is mesmerizing. Moments like that call to mind not just Jackson's well-established bona fides as a wizard of blockbuster fantasy but echo his humbler, hungrier origins as a purveyor of colorful, close-to-the-bone, low-budget New Zealand indie horror. A broken bar, the kinds of echoes, in other words, that made him such an interesting choice to adapt Tolkien in the first place. The Battle of the Five Armies is 5 yards of fine cloth stretched across a 15-yard board, a terrific 10-minute set piece buttressed later by a cheer-worthy 45-minute sequence, with not much of anything occupying the spaces in between. Much of it is frayed and faded and hopelessly actual in 2 of 3 films now. So that's a lot of losing and finding and losing, but in the aggregate, the film ends up with more satisfying material, percentage-wise, than the achingly slow-paced The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey, which kicked things off, barely, in 2012, or the meth-addled flitting between ill-constructed subplots in 2013's The Hobbit, The Desolation of Smaug. The film's biggest problem is the obvious one, not, precisely, that decision to break the meager little book into 3 long tentpole films, but the way that decision came up so late in the game. Initially, the idea was to make The Hobbit into a 2-part adaptation, and the revised concept came after the script was written and principal photography was completed, and the material had been shaped into 2 individually contained features. Jackson and fellow writer-producers Fran Walsh and Bilbo Baggins did a solid enough job of fashioning An Unexpected Journey into a fairly cohesive thing even after chopping its send-off and bloating it up with extraneous material in the middle. But The Desolation of Smaug felt at once too rushed and too aimless in all its padding, and the cliffhanger ending tacked on after its somewhat functional third-act climax made it feel needlessly unfulfilled in a way that none of the team's earlier Tolkien films had. But the worst of it is only now coming to fruition, for if The Desolation of Smaug is kind of a self-contained object with the illusion of a final act, The Battle of the Five Armies is that film's actual final act, bafflingly inflated to 144 minutes and given no first and second acts of its own. It's literally about virtually nothing but the run-up to its battle and the battle itself, trying desperately to buttress that with enough character scenes to feel like it has some kind of self-contained arc. The movie is never worse than in its hectic opening, which abruptly picks up with the massive dragon Smaug, voiced and motion captured by Benedict Cumberbatch, flying to destroy the lake town of Escarath, outside of the lonely mountain Erebor where he lived for many years in evil isolation, until some dwarves riled him up by dousing him in gold from giant molten statue. Fuck alive, the end of The Desolation of Smaug was asinine. So Smaug burns the hell out of Erebor, until he is eventually taken down with an enormous black arrow fired by the brave pessimist bard, Luke Evans, who has been prepared for just such an occasion. I admire any film with the instinct to hit the ground running like this, but Smaug's attack is not at all suited to the function the film requires it to serve, and we're never really invited back into Jackson's Middle-earth so much as we are plopped there, as the film clumsily juggles characters and plot developments that follow as the Escarath populace reorients itself and marches off to Erebor to demand their share of Smaug's treasure from newly reinstated dwarf King Richard Armitage. The blunt force style of storytelling only really serves to call attention to how little reason we've been given to care about any of this even slightly. Near the end of the overall sequence, a dog wandering through the bottom of the frame looks straight into the camera in a manner that suggests it's trying to get out of the movie, please, and boy, did I ever feel for that dog. The opening sequence is the most aimless, trivial, aggravating part of a film that swoops from grandeur and the best filmmaking of Jackson's career since The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, all the way back to tinned dialogue and embarrassingly amateur shot setups and editing at a fairly regular clip. The Battle of the Five Armies is at one and the same time far too indulgent in stretching barely any narrative content out to some 2¼ hours of movie, pre-credits, while hectically rushed in its depiction of what little bit is there. The subplot from the last movie then found the wizard Gandalf, Ian McKellen, never less interesting in the role, trapped in a ruin-haunted fortress, is bluntly disposed of in about 5 minutes, featuring weird cameos from Cate Blanchett, Christopher Lee, and Hugo Weaving. Stephen Fry's nefarious master of Escarath evaporates from this movie so quickly that I kept assuming he'd show up again. Meanwhile, plenty of lengthy, soporific time is dedicated to politicking between elves and men, between dwarves and elves, and to maneuvering armies into place before they actually start to fighting. And a great deal too much time is turned over to the allegedly comic scallywag Alfred, Ryan Gage, who gets himself into the most hellishly unentertaining scraps and represents the single most ill-advised choice in this series, even worse than the dismal introduction of a romantic plot between Dwarf Keely, Aidan Turner, and Elf Toriel, Evangeline Lilly, the latter of whom makes it almost 2/3 into the Battle of the Five Armies before devolving into a generic action GRRL damsel in distress. Some of this works better than other parts, and generally speaking, the tension the filmmakers creak out of the build-up is better than the actual fighting itself, which gets to be a bit numbing. And in the case of the protracted, battle between Thrawn and his CGI orc nemesis Asog, Manu Bennett, it's both numbing and boring, since the film's obvious hope that we'll regard this as a great clash between lifelong enemies is undercut by the crappy development of Thrawn over the trilogy, and Armitage's limp performance thereof, and the complete absence of any development of Asog. Regardless of the rest, nothing is better than when Martin Freeman's Bilbo Baggins is the focus. After being rudely sidelined in the desolation of Smaug, the ostensible lead character is back to getting enough screen time to feel like he matters again, and he's used as well here as in any other point of the trilogy. The point of Hobbits, really, is to domesticate high fantasy. This was their function in both of Tolkien's novels featuring them, and it's something that Jackson Company have never grasped better than they do here, using Freeman's comic fluster as a way of lightening and humanizing, hobbitizing, the clashes of battles, the ponderously portentous dialogue, and Howard Shore's emphatically epic score. Freeman, I am more convinced than ever, is the most interesting performer in the entirety of the Jackson Middle-earth franchise, playing a character whose arc and emotions he has thought about far more than the writers ever did, and making his interpretation all about Bilbo, not about the enormity of the films themselves. It is a little performance, a silly and friendly performance, and a very true performance, and because of all this, it is the absolute, clear highlight of a sloppy movie. Sloppy, but not without its compensations. Limited to basically just 3 locations, the ruined city outside the Dwarf Keep, the Dwarf Keep itself, and an enormous iron hellgate. The director's tendency towards gawking at his sets is tamped down a bit, and instead of feeling like a travelogue for a CGI-aided New Zealand, the Battle of the Five Armies actually starts to use the camera to shape the action and provide a sense of scale. It is the only one of the Hobbit movies to come even close to attaining the visual sweep of all 3 Lord of the Rings pictures. Even some of the least interesting moments, like the Thrawn, Asog fight, are pepped up by the introduction of winter, adding a harsh edge of white to Andrew Lesnie's characteristically postcard-like cinematography. And for the first time in 3 films, there's no obviously weak CGI. Some of the close-ups of Asog and other computer-made creatures probably could have done with a bit less bright, direct lighting, but there's not a single shot that matches the tacky video game aesthetic of an unexpected journey, especially. In essence, it mostly works as a popcorn movie, a fatiguing popcorn movie whose action scenes are repetitive and occasionally too ridiculous to care about. Once again, Orlando Bloom's forgettable Legalize shows up to turn things into Mario game, but which are presented with a passion and gravity that feels so much better than the meandering idiocy of the last 2 movies, and punctured by Freeman's wonderful low-key comedy when it all threatens to become top-heavy with pretension. It proves that the whole idea of a 3-part Hobbit was a ruinous idea for more than it ever comes close to redeeming the first 2. And it still feels like a paltry return to Middle-earth that would have been better left undone. But it has its moments. And next year, when the single-movie fan edits of the trilogy are complete, I don't mind supposing that some of the loveliest stuff will be in the 20 or so minutes that come out of this last movie. Review. 3 And thus is one of the most ill-considered experiments in franchise extension, and precisely the way it was bound to end. The Hobbit, the Battle of the Five Armies, the grand finale of director Peter Jackson's three-part adaptation of J.R.R. Tolkien's 1937 children's novel, feels like a weirdly shaped movie fragment and not a movie at all, though it's still perhaps the best individual film of the trilogy, if only by default. It starts out terribly, finds itself by the end of its first hour, starts to lose the thread during the wandering titular battle sequence that can only boast about its mass, and not its narrative momentum nor its visual excitement, and finds itself again in the last 15 minutes or so, when it refocuses itself on the Hobbit, whose status of protagonist has been more nominal than actual in 2 of 3 films now. So that's a lot of losing and finding and losing, but in the aggregate, the film ends up with more satisfying material, percentage-wise, than the achingly slow-paced The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey, which kicked things off, barely, in 2012. Or the meth-addled flirting between ill-constructed subplots in 2013's The Hobbit, The Desolation of Smaug. The film's biggest problem is the obvious one, not, precisely, that decision to break the meager little book into 3 long tentpole films, but the way that decision came up so late in the game. Initially, the idea was to make The Hobbit into a 2-part adaptation, and the revised concept came after the script was written and principal photography was completed, and the material had been shaped into 2 individually contained features. Jackson and fellow writer-producers Fran Walsh and Bilbo Baggins did a solid enough job of fashioning An Unexpected Journey into a fairly cohesive thing, even after chopping its send-off and bloating it up with extraneous material in the middle. But The Desolation of Smaug felt at once too rushed and too aimless in all its padding, and the cliffhanger ending tacked on after its somewhat functional third-act climax made it feel needlessly unfulfilled in a way that none of the team's earlier Tolkien films had. But the worst of it is only now coming to fruition, for if The Desolation of Smaug is kind of a self-contained object with the illusion of a final act, The Battle of the Five Armies is that film's actual final act, bafflingly inflated to 144 minutes and given no first and second acts of its own. It's literally about virtually nothing but the run-up to its battle and the battle itself, trying desperately to buttress that with enough character scenes to feel like it has some kind of self-contained arc. The movie is never worse than in its hectic opening, which abruptly picks up with the massive dragon Smaug, voiced and motion captured by Benedict Cumberbatch, flying to destroy the lake town of Osgiliath, outside of the lonely mountain Erebor where he lived for many years in evil isolation, until some dwarves riled him up by dousing him in gold from giant molten statue. Fuck alive, the end of The Desolation of Smaug was asinine. So Smaug burns the hell out of Erebor, until he is eventually taken down with an enormous black arrow fired by the brave pessimist bard, Luke Evans, who has been prepared for just such an occasion. I admire any film with the instinct to hit the ground running like this, but Smaug's attack is not at all suited to the function the film requires it to serve, and we're never really invited back into Jackson's Middle-earth so much as we are plopped there. As the film clumsily juggles characters and plot developments that follow as the Osgiliath populace reorients itself and marches off to Erebor to demand their share of Smaug's treasure from newly reinstated dwarf King Richard Armitage, the blunt force style of storytelling only really serves to call attention to how little reason we've been given to care about any of this even slightly. Near the end of the overall sequence, a dog wandering through the bottom of the frame looks straight into the camera in a manner that suggests it's trying to get out of the movie, please, and boy, did I ever feel for that dog. The opening sequence is the most aimless, trivial, aggravating part of a film that swoops from grandeur and the best filmmaking of Jackson's career since The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, all the way back to tenured dialogue and embarrassingly amateur shot setups and editing at a fairly regular clip. The Battle of the Five Armies is at one and the same time far too indulgent in stretching barely any narrative content out to some 2¼ hours of movie pre-credits, while hectically rushed in its depiction of what little bit is there. The subplot from the last movie then found a wizard Gandalf, Ian McKellen, never less interesting in the role, trapped in a ruin-haunted fortress, is bluntly disposed of in about 5 minutes, featuring weird cameos from Cate Blanchett, Christopher Lee, and Hugo Weaving. Stephen Fry's nefarious master of Escarath evaporates from this movie so quickly that I kept assuming he'd show up again. Meanwhile, plenty of lengthy, soporific time is dedicated to politicking between elves and men, between dwarves and elves, and to maneuvering armies into place before they actually start to fighting. And a great deal too much time is turned over to the allegedly comic scallywag Alfred, Ryan Gage, who gets himself into the most hellishly unentertaining scraps and represents the single most ill-advised choice in this series, even worse than the dismal introduction of a romantic plot between Dwarf Keely, Aidan Turner, and Elf Toriel, Evangeline Lilly, the latter of whom makes it almost 2/3 into the Battle of the Five Armies before devolving into a generic action GRRL damsel in distress. Some of this works better than other parts, and generally speaking, the tension the filmmakers creak out of the build-up is better than the actual fighting itself, which gets to be a bit numbing. And in the case of the protracted, battle between Thrawn and his CGI orc nemesis Asog, Manu Bennett, it's both numbing and boring, since the film's obvious hope that we'll regard this as a great clash between lifelong enemies is undercut by the crappy development of Thrawn over the trilogy, and Armitage's limp performance thereof, and the complete absence of any development of Asog. Review. For even if you don't already know how the fantasy epic The Hobbit ends for the scrappy halfling at the center of it all, if you've been paying any attention at all over the past few years, you should by now have a pretty good idea of what awaits in director Peter Jackson's trilogy ending The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies. Jackson's latest film isn't just a continuation of the story based on J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings prequel, it's also a continuation of the visual and storytelling style of those cinematic predecessors, 2012's The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey, and last year's The Hobbit, The Desolation of Smaug. It's also very much the movie that fans familiar with those films would expect. Like those earlier films, Battle of the Five Armies, opening today, December 16th, ahead of the pre-Christmas weekend rush, is nothing short of gorgeous from a visual standpoint, from the sweeping Middle-earth settings to the richly designed costumes to the seamless visual effects. It also exhibits a keen imagination on the part of Jackson, who has proven to be as gifted as anyone in Hollywood when it comes to the art of big-screen world-building. But it's also something of a self-indulgent thing, making for an uneven film that often feels bloated. Granted, it's still the shortest of Jackson's 3 Hobbit films, but, burdened with the task of wrapping up all the narrative threads Jackson added to flesh out Tolkien's 310-page novel to trilogy length, it still clocks in at a hefty 2 hours and 24 minutes. Still, for all of its faults, Battle of the Five Armies, much like last year's Desolation of Smaug, marks for a reasonably entertaining foray into the realm of fantasy, and an improvement over Jackson's initial 2012 entry in the trilogy. Those familiar with Tolkien's original novel will probably remember that its full title is The Hobbit, or There and Back Again. The first 2 films in Jackson's trilogy covered their part of that journey. The Battle of the Five Armies covers the and back again part. It starts quickly, and with considerable amounts of dragonfire. At the same time, it offers little remediation for those who might have decided to parachute into the trilogy without having seen the first 2 films. When we last left Bilbo Baggins, the story's titular Hobbit, played wonderfully by the well-cast Martin Freeman, he had already been enlisted, against his better judgment, to join a company of dwarves on a journey to retake their ancestral home from the fearsome, fire-breathing dragon Smaug, voiced by Benedict Cumberbatch, and one of the highlights of the film's brand of computer-animated wizardry. That unexpected journey saw Bilbo and company, along with the wizard Gandalf, traversing all of Middle-earth, and braving its many perils, to arrive at the kingdom under the mountain. Once the proud, treasure-laden fortress home of the dwarves' ancestors, it had been taken over by the murderous Smaug. In the cliffhanger ending of last year's Desolation of Smaug, the company of dwarves had just awakened the dragon. What's more, They enraged him with their attempts to oust him from the mountain. That sent him off to the nearby human settlement of Laketown to flex his dragony muscle and exact a measure of revenge. And that's where Battle of the Five Armies picks up, as Bilbo and company watch from their mountain perch while Laketown bears the fiery wrath of Smaug. It's a promising start. Jackson's version of Laketown, envisioned as a cross between Venice and a generic medieval English village, is a wonderful, fully realized place. What's more, the characters populating it, starting with its corrupt fat cat mayor as portrayed by actor Stephen Fry, are an intriguing and entertaining lot. I can imagine a whole film focusing solely on Laketown and the treacherous happenings to which it apparently plays host. To be clear, one film. Not two, and certainly not a trilogy. Unfortunately, it doesn't last. It isn't long before Battle of the Five Armies becomes an atmospheric and occasionally heart-pounding film, but it's also a sprawling one, as Jackson gets to work tying up his film's various narrative threads. There's the story of the newly reinstalled dwarf king McKellen Richard Armitage, and his search amid the wreckage of the freshly dragged mountain fortress for a long-lost, but dangerously corrupting, gem known as the Arkenstone. There's the resolution of the budding elf-on-dwarf romance between the elegant Toriel, Evangeline Lilly, invented by Jackson and fellow screenwriter Fran Walsh for the big screen trilogy, and the noble Keeley, Aidan Turner. There's the muddled Lord of the Rings backstory that Jackson has crowbarred into the mix, involving wizards Gandalf, Ian Coven, Saruman, Christopher Lee, and Radagast, Sylvester McCoy, along with elvish elite Elrond, Hugo Weaving, and Galadriel, Kate Blanchett, and, of course, there's the titular battle, which brings it all to a close, and in enormous, computer-enhanced fashion. That's a lot of storytelling going on, and it costs Battle of the Five Armies a certain cohesion. Emotionally, things ends nicely with a sentimental but effective on-screen epilogue, as Jackson uses the last 10 minutes of his film to say goodbye to Middle-earth, a place in which he has resided professionally for well more than a decade, dating to his first Lord of the Rings film in 2001, and to his audience, still, as solid a trilogy as Jackson's story is from a technical filmmaking standpoint. Looking back on it all now that's run its course, it's hard not to think it would have been a much more entertaining, not to mention a far more brisk, two-film series, as originally envisioned. The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies 3 stars, out of 5 snapshot, the third and final film in director Peter Jackson's adaptation of J.R.R. Tolkien's fantasy epic The Hobbit, which functions as a sequel to his Lord of the Rings trilogy. What works, as with the previous installments, it is a visually impressive film boasting an epic sweep and strong technical details that highlight Jackson's knack for big-screen world-building. What doesn't, also like the previous installments, it is bloated from a narrative standpoint, slowing to an often plodding pace as Jackson wraps up the story's myriad loose ends. Review. 5 At last it has come at the third and final part of Peter Jackson's unnecessarily long and overly bloated adaptation of The Hobbit, a book you can read in less time than it takes to watch the films. Here be dragons, complaining, anti-elf sentiment and some spoilers. A broken bar. My initial impression is much the same as it was for the second film. We get it, Peter Jackson. You like elves. You can stop it now. What? You want more detail? There's many of his trademarks from the previous films. A slow-motion brooding, screams of no, call forwards to the Rings trilogy, unneeded and in some cases downright bizarre changes from the source material and increasingly ridiculous weapons and armor. Oh, and elves hogging the spotlight. But we'll get to them later. Broken bar. Let's start with the positives. Cosplayers, LARPers and D&D players will be incredibly happy about this. The costuming and design work is gorgeous, as always, though a lot of the weapons and armor go from the typical fantasy style to just flat-out absurd. Martin Freeman does very well without doing a direct impression of Ian Holm. His goodbye to the dwarves is wonderful. Richard Armitage continues have a voice that makes me all kinds of tingly, while the rest of the dwarves do what they can with the few tiny crumbs of dialogue they have. It's wonderfully true to the book in that way, which is one of the few ways it is. I suspect much of that will wind up in the extended edition, which is a mercy given the bloated length of the previous film. Christopher Lee's brief appearance immediately improves things, because he's Christopher freaking Lee, as does Billy Connolly, who plays Dane Ironfoot as an angry drunk Glaswegian. How he didn't get cast in Braveheart I'll never know, and Billy Boyd's song over the end credits, while not Neil Finn's song of The Lonely Mountain, is far from terrible. Special mention has to go to the gorgeous armor that the dwarves find in Erebor, much of which they discard before charging into battle. Mind you, given how effective the orcs' plate mail was, I'm not surprised they didn't bother to wear it, though I'm curious as to how effective a mail shirt is when you don't button it up in the middle. And don't get me started on the trolls, either the mobile catapults or the battering ram. Furthermore, I'd been looking forward to seeing the White Council's assault on Dol Guldur. It's just a pity that Gandalf didn't get to do much, if anything, in it. That Trank's up there with Bard using his son as a narrow rest. Bard's cardboard assault on a troll. That was this film's version of Legalize's shield surfing during Helm's Deep, or the prattling of Eldrick Lickspittle, a cut-rate Grima worm tongue by way of "Are you being served?" And yes, Jackson's elf fetish is in full strength. Before you say anything, I have no issue with the addition of Toriel. Adding a female character into the film is fine by me, as there aren't any in the book. I'm not quite so hot about the romance between her and Keeley, dragged out for maximum drama that it is. But it could have been far worse than it was. Thranduil is still a dick, as per his previous appearances, though he does get his tryst on during the battle. And then we come to Legolas, a broken bar now. Given he's Thranduil's son, his appearance is understandable. The amount of screen time he gets and what he gets to do on screen, that's another matter. From slaying orcs left, right and center, bouncing around like he's in a video game, to the sustained laughter of parts of the audience and a barely restrained "oh, for fuck's sake" from me, and basically upstaging the dwarves at almost every moment. Yes, the elves are an immortal bunch of stuck-up prats who act as though they're better than everyone else, but the dwarves are meant to be the stars of the film. I'm pretty sure that Legalize gets more dialogue than almost half of the dwarves combined. And people look at me funny when I say I dislike Elvas, a broken bar. Did I enjoy it? More than the second one. It does feel artificially extended, like butter scrapped over too much bread. A broken bar. I'd put Jackson into the same category as George Lucas. He's very capable, but needs to be told and no every so often, or failing that, have it written into his contract that his film can only be so long. I'd love to see the original plan for the two movies adaptation. I think that would have been far superior. So yeah, in some ways I want to see more, but at the same time I'm glad it's over. 9 stars out of 5. Review. 6 Director A. Peter Jackson. Screenplay A. Philippa Boyens, Guillermo del Toro, Peter Jackson, Fran Walsh. Based on the novel The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. Producers A. Carolyn Cunningham, Peter Jackson, Fran Walsh, Zane Weiner. Photography, 3D, A. Andrew Lesney. Music A. Howard Shore. Visual Effects Supervisor A. Eric Sandin. Visual Effects A. Weta Digital. Special Effects Supervisor A. Steve Ingram. Creature, Makeup Effects Supervisor A. Richard Taylor. Makeup Effects A. Weta Workshop. Makeup/Prosthetics Supervisor A. Jason Docherty. Production Design A. Dan Hanna. Production Company A. Wingnet Films. New Line Cinema, MGM. Martin Freeman, Bilbo Baggins, Ian Coven, Gandalf, Richard Armitage, Thranduil Cancheld, Luke Evans, Bard/Girion, Evangeline Lilly, Toriel, Orlando Bloom, Legolas, Lee Pace, Thranduil, Ryan Gage, Alfred, Aidan Turner, Keeley, Kent Stott, Balin, Kate Blanchett, Galadriel, Christopher Lee, Saruman, Hugo Weaving, Elrond, James Nesbitt, Balfour, Dino Gorman, Feely, Stephen Hunter, Bomber, Graham McTavish, Dwellin, William Kirker, Bifer, John Callan, Oin, Peter Hambleton, Gloin, Judd Brophy, Nori, Mark Adlow, Dory, Adam Brown, Ori, Manu Bennett, Asog, Stephen Fry, Master of Lake Town, Sylvester McCoy, Radagast, Benedict Cumberbatch, Smog/Necromancer, Billy Connolly, Day 2 Ironfoot, Ian Holm, Old Bilbo. As the dragon Smog lays waste to Lake Town, Bard takes it on and fires a giant arrow into the vulnerable spot of its heart, killing it. Inside the Lonely Mountain, Throno orders the entrance barricaded against all outsiders as he obsessively searches for the Arkenstone. Bilbo Baggins, who has taken the Arkenstone, sees Thron descending into madness, suspecting the other members of the party of taking it, while breaking off his agreement with the people of Lake Town and refusing them their share of the dragon's wealth. However, the death of Smaug sees armies from all over Rathos of woodland elves, dwarves and wargs, along with the dispossessed peoples of Lake Town, all gathering in preparation for war. The Battle of the Five Armies probably needs no introduction as the third and final of the films in Peter Jackson's Hobbit trilogy, following The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey, 2012, and The Hobbit, The Desolation of Smaug, 2013. It also marks the sixth occasion upon which he has made ventured into the world of Middle-earth following his original highly acclaimed trilogy The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, 2001, The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, 2002, and The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, 2003. Jackson's first two Hobbit films felt underwhelming, as opposed to the first trilogy adapting a massive 1,500-page work that had been published in 3 books. Jackson has padded The Hobbit, 1937, a single volume of 350 pages out into 3 films of equivalent length. Each of the previous 3-hour movies had only comprised 5-6 chapters of book apiece. The Battle of the Five Armies, notably the shortest of all the Lord of the Rings films, makes do with a mere 4.5 chapters. The padding is obvious. The Battle of the Five Armies opens on Bard's killing of Smaug with the arrow to the heart. It is a great set piece to open the film on and gets the drama flowing. It has the way to workshop doing their top work and audiences on the seat of their chairs from the moment the film starts, and yet it also badly feels like it should have been the climactic set piece of The Desolation of Smaug. Indeed, you feel like such a showcapper would have pushed that otherwise lackluster effort into being a much better film. We then cut to some bits where Galadriel, Elrond and Saruman rescue Gandalf and drive the embryonic Sauron away, which is nothing much other than padding and fan service to tie the two trilogies together. We then come to the meat of the Battle of the Five Armies and the inpoliticking between the maddened Thrin and his quest for the Arkenstone as armies of men, elves and wargs arrive at the gates of the mountain stronghold. These contain some of the best scenes in the film as Jackson allows his actors, most notably Richard Armitage, Luke Evans, Lee Pace and Ian Stott, to do the best acting of the trilogy. Jackson has relaxed directorially from the previous films and does more to allow the actors to carry the parts. Of course, Jackson still indulges his worst trait, overblown and crashingly obvious symbolism, as well as letting visual effects stand in for actors enacting characters. Thron gets nightmare fantasies of drowning in an ocean of molten gold, as though we had not gained the impression that is made at every other point in the script that he has become maddened with his obsession with hoarding the wealth. Similarly, Ryan Gage is written with a single-note characterization, cowardliness, something that if every scene he is in where he is the comic heel doing the craven thing did not make obvious, Jackson physically overemphasizes by giving him a hunch, bad teeth and a snivelly nose. These are the sort of characteristics you would expect of a director making children's films, not ones with clear ambitions to be regarded as one of the top filmmakers in the world. Nuance, you feel, is a characteristic lost on Peter Jackson. I have compared Peter Jackson's Hobbit trilogy to George Lucas's Star Wars prequels in exactly the same way as it was when Lucas came to Star Wars Episode III, Revenge of the Sith, 2005. The Battle of the Five Armies becomes the last opportunity for Peter Jackson, after having lost his way with the previous 2 entries, to get his act together and deliver what his fanbase expect him to. And the good news is that Jackson, just like Lucas finally did in Revenge of the Sith, manages to deliver. I get the impression that Jackson never fully understood why The Lord of the Rings worked, and you got the feeling that he was tone deaf to the romantic elements that fans reacted to in the first film, such that he had to go back and shoot more scenes in order to boost this in the subsequent entries. The first 2 Hobbit films saw him shuffling around aspects of Tolkien in a slightly different mix in the hope that some of it would connect, as most of this was concentrated on bloated visual effects sequences, fan service and comic scenes with dwarves, it failed to work. Jackson tries to add romance to this trilogy, despite the fact there are no major female roles in the book. But the sight here of Evangeline Lilly getting all maudlin over the romantic protestations of Aidan Turner, who is half her size, look more absurd than they do anything to cause tears to swell in your eyes. Nevertheless, the last 3 chapters of The Hobbit have served Jackson up a near-infallible opportunity to make the trilogy work for him at last. Almost all of this is concentrated around the titular Battle of Five Armies. Jackson wowed audiences with the massive Battle of Helm's Deep and the Two Towers at a point for most that seemed to signal that The Lord of the Rings was starting to come together as great cinema, and tried to replicate that in The Return of the King with lesser effect. The Battle of the Five Armies delivers up on a mithril platter the opportunity for him to create the mother of all battle scenes, and that is fairly much what Jackson does for something like 45 minutes. It is the opportunity for him to go to town on all the epic scenes of armies covering entire valleys and hillsides, sweeping helicopter shots across teeming battlefields, getting the camera down amidst the melee and watching combatants exchange sword, axe and hammer blows. Even the introduction of battle elks, goats and even bats. The conflict is spread out across several different sets of terrain, from valley to iced over river surface to mountainside pinnacles, inside a tower and down amidst the ruins of the dwarfish stronghold. It is Jackson doing the sort of show-offy aiming for the epic that Jackson does well, and finally it is the point that the Hobbit trilogy starts to deliver what we have been wanting it to for the last 2 films. It gets all the posturing, the tragic emotional angers, the heroic triumphs right. You do quibble with some of the improbable physical moves that the combat requires, like Legolas's apparent anti-gravity climb up the stones of a collapsing bridge, but it is Jackson doing what we wanted him to do. The question is, what next for Peter Jackson? He has said that the Battle of the Five Armies will be his last visit to Middle-earth and that he is off to concentrate on smaller New Zealand stories. Somehow, when it comes to a director whose only directorial move is the epic-sized canvas and exaggerated overstatement, you suspect that he won't be doing this for long and will be back making massive epics in relative quick time. After all, he still has a bunch of option properties he has said he will do someday, including a remake of The Dambusters, 1954, adaptations of Naomi Novik's Dragon novel Temeraire, 2006, and a sequel to The Adventures of Tintin, 2011. Somehow, one suspects as these fail to take off, is anybody really hungering for a Dambusters remake? Was Spielberg's first Tintin film such a burning success that audiences will be queuing around the block? That Jackson will be back in Middle-earth to make another $1 billion or so soon enough. My prediction will be that he, or at least some other under his producership, will be returning to Middle-earth, probably with material pillaged from the Silmarillion, 1976, within the next decade. Subsequent to this, Middle-earth was revisited in the Jackson-less TV series The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, 2022, while Jackson and team returned to produce the anime film The Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim, 2024. Also of interest is the earlier animated adaptations The Hobbit, 1977, The Lord of the Rings, 1978, and The Return of the King, 1980. Tolkien, 2019, is a biopic of J.R.R. Tolkien. Peter Jackson's other films include the zero-budget splatter film Bad Taste, 1988, the hilariously adult take on The Muppets Meet the Feebles, 1990, the gore-drenched zombie comedy Brain Dead, Dead Alive, 1992, Heavenly Creatures, 1994, based on a sensational true-life murder in 1950s New Zealand flop ghost comedy The Frighteners, 1996, the highly successful The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, 2001, The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, 2002, and The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, 2003, his remake of King Kong, 2005, and the afterlife film The Lovely Bones, 2009. Jackson has also produced District 9, 2009, The Adventures of Tintin, 2011, written, produced Mortal Engines, 2018, and produced The Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim, 2024. Review. 7. The sixth and final film of Peter Jackson's adaptation of Tolkien's beautiful world is best described as a whirlwind of emotions. The Hobbit, the Battle of the Five Armies, had much to live up to, and I think it succeeded in a way that the previous two Hobbit films failed to do. It captured the epic scope of the world in a way that wasn't possible in the previous two films, but was completely mandatory for The Lord of the Rings. Being the third part of a one-part novel, the film was obviously going to be the entire climax without any of the exposition that made up the other two parts. The departures from the book were fair when adding new side stories, but detracted from the grandeur when replacing Tolkien's vision with Jackson's. The cast was as exceptional as ever. Martin Freeman brings an undeniable charm to Bilbo that few could pull off. Sir Ian McKellen is of course the perfect man for Gandalf, and Christopher Lee, Hugo Weaving and Cate Blanchett turned their characters one scene into one of the film's highlights. New to this film, however, were the dynamic performances of Lee Pace, who plays the Elf King Thranduil, and Richard Armitage, who plays Throno. Being named after a huge battle, the film was sure to deliver quite a bit of violence. It definitely delivered on that, but with less gore than expected, and mixed with scenes that drew fits of laughter out of sheer ridiculousness. For all the fanservice in the film, there was an egregious lack of burn. Even still, the battle was worthy of its place in Middle-earth's history. As sad as it is to come to terms with the ending of Middle-earth's time on the screen, this final film was a satisfying way to take it out. While it could never live up to Return of the King, it certainly will live as the greatest of the Hobbit films.